Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Amen. I am so excited to share our Amen Clinic's Brain Health Certification Coaching Program, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, and the brain and lives of others. The program mission, brain health is the center of overall health and success. Our why, passion, and purpose is to help people achieve brain healthy lives in every way possible. And the reason for that is brains run the world. They run the stock market, the local market, huge corporations, mom and pop shops down the street. Brains run governments, although not that well. Schools, this is the Fraser Academy in Vancouver, Canada, that does our brain health course. Churches, this is Pastor Rick Warren at Saddleback Church. We also planted brain health in his church. Families, this is my family. And brains run you. Yet most people rarely think about the brain, which is a huge mistake because success in anything you do always starts with a healthy brain. So the problem, as I see it, is brain-related problems affect 200 million Americans at some point in their lives. Brain fog, memory problems, depression, anxiety, insomnia, attentional issues, and even being overweight or obese, as we'll talk about. Most people don't know that Alzheimer's disease is expected to triple in the next 30 years, and there's no cure on the horizon. Imaging research teaches us that it starts in the brain decades before there are any symptoms. And how many of you want to live until you're 85? Did you know that 50% of 85-year-olds will be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's disease? These are two brain SPECT studies. SPECT looks at blood flow and activity. We're going to talk a lot about them. The image on the left is a healthy scan. The image on the right is an Alzheimer's scan. And it's been well documented now nearly 30 years that Alzheimer's disease decreases in the back half of the brain. Parietal lobes, temporal lobes, something called the posterior cingulate, which you'll learn all about. And Alzheimer's disease can actually see evidence of decreases decades before people have any symptoms. So based on imaging research, the National Institute of Aging recently revised the staging guidelines for Alzheimer's disease. So it used to be normal, something called mild cognitive impairment or many senior moments, Alzheimer's disease. But based on this imaging work, they added another stage. So the first stage is still normal. The second stage is new. It's normal, but your brain is deteriorating. So no obvious symptoms, but where noxious changes are already brewing in the brain. They call it the preclinical stage. Now, why is that horrifying? Because you don't have any symptoms, but your brain is already in trouble. So, for example, the woman on the right is a 59-year-old woman. What that means is changes in her brain were likely happening in her 20s. Depression is one of the greatest killers of our time. It affects 50 million Americans at some point in their life. And depression all by itself is a major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. In fact, if you're a woman and you have depression, it doubles your risk for Alzheimer's disease. If you are a man, it quadruples your risk. It's also a risk factor for heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and obesity. And obesity is a serious national crisis. More than 2/3 of us are overweight, 1/3 of us are obese. In 2008, the medical costs of obesity were $147 billion. Obesity-related disease is a leading cause of death associated with hypertension, stroke, heart disease, and cancer. Obesity is a risk factor for over 30 medical illnesses, including Alzheimer's disease, depression, and suicide. Obesity is skyrocketing since the early 1980s, where very few states had high rates. Now almost all states have high rates. No state met the Healthy People 2010 goal of having less than 15% of its population obese. In 2000, no state had more than 30% of the population obese. Now 12 states do. I think these are not separate problems, but they are different expressions of the same unhealthy lifestyle. I wrote a book called The Amen Solution, The Secrets to Being Thinner, Smarter, and Happier, and realized if you do the strategies that we're going to talk about in this course, it directly attacks obesity, depression, and Alzheimer's disease. There are terrifying statistics. I mean, why you should really care? There are 140 studies now that say as your weight goes up, the actual physical size and function of your brain goes down. The first study was done by my friend Cyrus Raji from the University of Pittsburgh. They did MRI scans, and what they found is people who are overweight compared to healthy weight had 4% less brain volume, and their brains looked 8 years older than healthy people. People who were obese had 8% less brain volume, and their brains looked 16 years older than healthy people. When I read that study, I went then and looked at the Amen Clinic's normal database. So we have a normal database of about 120 people, and we went, because when we did our normal database, we didn't really pay attention to weight because we didn't know better. And so we took our overweight people, compared them to our healthy weight people, and the overweight people had lower activity, especially in the front part of the brain. Now, why does that matter? Your frontal lobes, as we'll see, are involved with really important function: forethought, judgment, impulse control, organization, planning, empathy, learning from the mistakes that you make. We then did a large study on active and retired NFL players. And so we went and got our NFL players, and we said, well, it's the same thing too. We matched them by position, which is very important because different positions have different brain function. And what we found is the overweight players matched same position to the healthy weight players had lower function in their frontal lobes. So it really does tell a nice story that being overweight is bad for your brain. So as your weight goes up, the actual physical size and function of your brain goes down, which I think should just scare the fat off anyone. In our studies, as your weight goes up, thinking and reasoning scores go down as well. And if you're overweight, getting to a healthy weight is hard. You have to think through it. I mean, someone will give you a plan, we'll give you a plan, but you have to be able to process the plan, to follow through with the plan, and those are all frontal lobe functions. Fat is not innocuous. When I was in medical school in 1978 and cut into my first cadaver, you remember fat, it's like bright yellow and glistening and greasy looking, and I just thought it was a storage place for excess calories. It's not that at all. Fat is actually the largest endocrine organ in the body. It stores toxins, it releases lipid droplets, it produces pro-inflammatory cytokines, it promotes insulin resistance, and it takes healthy testosterone levels and turns them into unhealthy forms of estrogen. So fat is not your friend. Now, you don't get fat from eating fat. You get fat from eating sugar and foods that quickly turn to sugar. We'll talk a lot about that. But being at a healthy weight is critical for your mental health. I coined the term the dinosaur syndrome. I know it's rude, and I never meant for it to be rude, but the dinosaur syndrome, as your weight goes, big body, little brain, you're going to become extinct. But I find when I talk about it in lectures or I talk about it on television, it really illustrates the point, and people get healthy because they don't want to be a dinosaur. So, is anyone concerned? What you're going to hear from me is some anxiety is good. I used to think when I decided to be a psychiatrist that my job would be to lower people's anxiety. It's totally not my job. Because low anxiety levels are associated with people who go to jail and people who die early. There's a wonderful study. It's the longest longevity study ever done. It was started in 1921 by Lewis Terman at Stanford, where he evaluated 1,548 10-year-old children. And then he and subsequently other researchers followed these kids for the next 90 years. And he found the number one factor associated with longevity was conscientiousness. That if you said you were going to show up, and you show up on time consistently over time, you live longer than everybody else. Isn't that interesting? But what he also found was that the don't worry, be happy people died the earliest from accidents or preventable illnesses. That you need appropriate worry and appropriate anxiety to keep you on track. But fear just gets you started. Feeling amazing is what keeps people going for the long term. So stories inspire me. And in this course, we're going to talk about a lot of stories. Steve is one of my favorite stories. I actually just talked to him yesterday. So Steve, I think this is about 4 years ago, weighed 630 pounds. He was depressed. He had a 25-year addiction to alcohol and nicotine. He also had sleep apnea, hypertension, diabetes. He was in chronic pain. He was suicidal and on 10 medications. He wanted to kill himself, but he couldn't get upstairs to get his gun. Whenever Steve would fall, one or two people could never get him up. And one day he fell and he called 911 and a team of 9 people came. And he hurt his knee. They brought him to the hospital. And when Steve was at the hospital, he's thinking, he said, I'm either going to work to get well or I'm going to kill myself. By random chance, if you believe in random chance, I'm not a big believer in it, his sister saw me on public television in North Carolina for a program I have called Change Your Brain, Change Your Body. She bought the program for him, and when Steve came home, it was waiting for him, and Steve just did everything I asked him to do. So many people go, what's the one thing I should do? It's like, stop being stupid, do them all. He got his lab tests measured. He completely stopped drinking, completely stopped smoking. He couldn't run, obviously, but he would move in his chair to music, went on an elimination diet, which we'll talk about, and within 4 months, he dropped 149 pounds, which is mostly a lot of water, but I mean, it was awesome, gave him the motivation, and 2 years later, he was down nearly 400 pounds. And oh, by the way, he lost his diabetes, pain, his memory, mood, energy were better. He was addiction-free and off 8 medications. He's now one of the coaches on our online community course called Brain Fit Life. And I love him because if Steve can do this, most people can do this. So here's the big idea. With a little forethought and the Amen Clinics method, you can boost your brain and improve everything in your life. I want to brag a little bit about some of the contributions so that you know when I talk about this, it's not based on 50 cases that we've seen. Amen Clinics has the world's largest database of brain scans related to behavior, nearly 90,000 scans on people from 111 countries. So we're really excited, and we see complicated people. No one's coming from South Africa if it's an easy case. We also have active research collaborations with Columbia, NYU, UCLA, Thomas Jefferson, Duke, Johns Hopkins, the University of British Columbia, and UC Irvine. Some people who just hear about us, oh, they think there's no science behind it. We have 50 peer-reviewed articles involving SPECT, how SPECT changes clinical practice, how the Amen Clinics method improves outcomes, predicting treatment response for ADHD. We have articles on suicide, murder, how supplements can optimize brain function, the brain effects of football concussions in professional athletes, and one of my favorite studies is in those football players, demonstrating that a high percentage of them can be rehabilitated on a Brain Smart program. The effects of obesity on the brain, and even the effects of psychotherapy and meditation on the brain. So we're serious. We want to contribute to the scientific literature because we have 2 big goals. One is that imaging is used in clinical practice, and the other one is we want to study how natural things can heal the brain. So my colleagues and I have I've written 37 books, There are about 2.5 million books out in the world. We've had 9 New York Times bestsellers. The 2 books at the top are sort of the biggest books I've done, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, and the Daniel Plan, the program we did at Saddleback Church. My wife, who you'll meet in this course, is also a New York Times bestseller and has now written 6 books. We've done 9 national public television specials that have aired about 70,000 times across the U.S. It's just been a wonderful partnership with public television and Amen Clinics. We teach people about loving their brains. It's been really wonderful because we've been able to raise about $50 million for public television. We're strong advocates of education. We have a high school course and a college course. The high school course is in 42 states and 7 countries. It's 12 weeks to learn about why you should care about your brain and how to take care of it. Our program at Saddleback Church, which I'll talk about more in the course, was co-created with Mehmet Oz and Mark Hyman, and it's based on 5 pillars: faith, food, fitness, focus, and friends, which means we basically get better together. So one early tip, the fastest way to get well, to get really healthy, is to find the healthiest person you can stand and spend as much time around him or her as possible. We're really excited about this because we've exported this program around the globe, and our goal is literally to have thousands of churches do this program. We're also excited about our work with addiction treatment. I wrote a book called Unchain Your Brain, Breaking the Addictions That Steal Your Life with David Smith. David is considered by many the father of addiction medicine in the United States. He was the first delegate to the AMA when they made addiction medicine a specialty. And we've been able to plant brain health and or brain imaging into drug treatment centers, including the Salvation Army's largest drug treatment center in Anaheim. They planted our brain health program, and the stories are awesome. But also in Beacon House, Sierra Tucson, and the Hanley Center in Florida. We're also very excited about brain health in business. I'm part of Franklin Covey's productivity solution. I did brain health because it's brains that run the world, and they run businesses. We have our own community called Brain Fit Life that has thousands of members that are actively dedicated to brain health. And we have the tools online for them. And then we also produce our own supplement line, and the reason for that is when I started doing imaging, many of the medications I was using were in fact toxic to brain function. It quite horrified me. I'm a double board certified psychiatrist. I trained at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center. So I was to use things like Xanax and Ativan and anticonvulsants and SSRIs, and especially the benzos made the brain look like people were drinkers. It just didn't have a positive effect, at which point I began thinking not only things like hypnosis and biofeedback and cognitive therapy and meditation, but what are the supplements that might be helpful? And as I learned more, I got really excited. And then we decided to carry them at Amen Clinics because if you tell them to do something, by the time of their next visit, they've still not done it. And so we thought if we had them in the clinic, they'd at least start them. And then over time, I wanted our own formulas. So we're very excited about this. We also have a nonprofit foundation. It's called the Change Your Brain, Change Your Life Foundation, where we raise money to actively participate in education, research, and service. The foundation actually manages our database. We have, as a group, seen hundreds of physicians. Amen Clinics has seen Nobel laureates, political figures, more than 150 NFL players, Hall of Fame athletes, Pulitzer Prize winners, Oscar-winning actors, legendary musicians, religious leaders, and about 5,000 medical and mental health professionals have referred to us over the last 25 family members. And a very high percentage of our patients are referred to us by our patients, which is why it's always critical for us to do outstanding work. this is the outline for what we're going to do. 16 modules. The first one's going to be 9 principles to change your brain and your life. It really sort of sets up why we do what we do at the Amen Clinics. Brain systems and behavior, we'll look at their functions, problems, and solutions. And then we're going to give you a whole new way to diagnose people. The DSM, whatever version, 3, 3R, 4, 5, it was certainly progress. But it's not a complete document because it doesn't add any neuroscience. So we're going to take DSM categories and subdivide them based on our work with imaging. And then we're going to do a very long module on imaging and how looking at the brain really changes everything. And then I'm going to give you a very specific method, the Amen Clinics method. What is it that we do? We're going to talk about supplements. We're going to talk about a term I love called brain reserve. Brain reserve is just critical. It's the extra tissue you have to deal with whatever comes your way. When people are symptomatic, their reserve is gone. So our goal is not just to get people asymptomatic, it's to boost their reserve so they're better than they were even before they were sick. We'll talk about how to do that, including the effect hormones have on the brain. Talk about physical exercise, nutrition, and the gut-brain connection, because your gut makes more neurotransmitters than your brain. So if your gut's not right, you're not right. We're going to talk about the science of self-control. If you want to help people to get better, you have to know when they're vulnerable to not do what you ask them to do. So how can you hook them in? How can you, once they emotionally buy into the method, how do you get them to stay with it? We're going to talk about some psychological techniques. I call it kill the ants and directing your thoughts. We'll talk about innovative ways that people are getting the brain better, like hyperbaric oxygen. We're going to talk about decreasing the risk for brain aging, Alzheimer's disease, and other forms of dementia, creating brain-healthy communities, and we're going to talk about coaching others to brain health. I know it's a lot, but if you stay with us, you'll have brain envy by the end. And then you'll actually have a plan on how to keep it healthy.